Bible Worm, reading the Bible with Bible Worm.
Welcome to Bible Worm, getting to the core of the biblical text. I'm Dr. Amy Robertson, Director of Lifelong Learning and Music at Congregation Or Hadash in Sandy Springs, Georgia.
And I'm Dr. Robert Williamson, Professor of Religious Studies at Hendrix College and Theologian in Residence of Canvas Community in Little Rock, Arkansas. We're here every week to discuss the biblical text, both as biblical scholars and as people of faith, one Jewish and one Christian.
For the first episode of our summer series on disputing with God, we're reading the story of the golden calf, Exodus chapter 32, verses 1 through 20, and verses 30 through 35. We've read it together before, but the regular lectionary stops us pretty early in its unfolding. And when we moved farther into the text, we found that it directed our attention not to the Israelites or to God exactly, but to the space between them. Their relationship, still fairly new and fragile. And you know what else is right between them? Our man Moses, holding the tablets and trying to reach in both directions at once. What is left after this kind of rupture? What's possible? Thanks for being with us. Hey, Bobby, it's summer.
Hey, Amy, it is summer. There's this guy that lives in our house whose name is Summer Bobby, who is so much more of a fun guy than Dr. Williamson, who lives there like 9 months out of the year.
Uh-huh.
Every 7 years, there's a guy in our house named Sabbatical Bobby, and that guy is the best of all the Bobbies. I love that guy. He's not going to show up again for 2 more years, but then woohoo!
I really love the multiple personas that surround you, sort of like in a cloud. Like there's like that
Yeah.
Uncle Mortimer. What's his name?
Uncle Mortimer. Yeah, I
he's
forgot
a
about
totally
that guy.
different kind of like situation. But
Yeah.
I really like that.
Yesterday, I was driving my kids home from a t-ball game. And so there's this game. I don't know how we came up with this game, but there's this game we play that's called Baby Serval. And you know what a serval is? Like a very small cat, that like a wild cat that lives like in the plains of Africa.
People know that. Okay.
My daughter got really into servals
your
because
daughter got into some kind of show that now she knows every animal on the face of the earth.
well, that is true. Wild crats, yes. But this was because we went to the zoo in Little Rock and they had a stuffed serval in the gift shop, and she was like, "Ooh, I love servals." And so then she was into servals for like 2 years. And so we started playing this game called Baby Serval, where I am a baby serval. This happens in the car. I am a baby serval, and I'm driving a car, but I'm a serval, and I don't know how to drive. And my daughter is Mama Serval, who is sitting in the back seat of the car.
Trying to tell you how to drive.
And I'm scared of driving, and I'm like, "Oh, Mama Serval, I'm driving a car, but I'm just a cat. I don't have any hands, Mama Serval." And then we go, so I just basically scream
You just
for
scream
like
for the
however long
whole
we're
trip.
driving.
And I would like to propose that for some summer fun, you inhabit that persona while we read
On
Holy
Bible.
Scripture.
Oh, Amy, we're doing our summer series, Amy. I don't know how we're going to do it, Amy. I'm a little afraid, but I'm a servant. I'm going to do it. It's going to be okay. It's okay. Going to do it, Amy.
Some people have told me that before they listen to our recordings, they like read a transcript of it to sort of get a sense of what we're going to say. So I'm very curious how that will be transcribed.
Whether Wally is listening or not.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. That's pretty good. So for the summer, we have chosen some texts that somehow center us in this theme of arguing with God or negotiating with God or disputing with God or stomping your feet in the holy presence and saying, no, I'm not, I don't want to do the thing that you have in mind, and I don't want you to do it either. And I have to say, I'm a little like nervous maybe about this first text that we're doing the first two texts, really, because they are within the story of the golden calf. And what makes me nervous is that these are so well known. Like, we know these stories. What else could we possibly say about these stories? The beginning of the story is in the regular Bible worm liturgy. We did it maybe 2 years ago. It's like a year ago, 2 years ago. In 2024,
I can't remember where it shows up, but yeah, I think maybe through verse 14 or something like that.
Exactly. And so the usual liturgy gives us the beginning of the story. And so we typically focus on sort of what are the Israelites thinking, sort of what's going on with them, a little bit what's going on with God. And the reason that I wanted us to circle back to this text is to see what happens when we read a little more of the story over 2 weeks.
Yeah.
And focus on the space between them in particular, like focus on their relationship, which is really like a fairly fragile newborn relationship. I mean, it goes back to a covenant, certainly with the ancestors, but they really have just emerged from Egypt. Yes. They've just done the 10 Commandments. They're, like things are fragile and new. And then there's this huge rupture. I don't know. I've become very interested in how that plays out.
Yeah, I'm so excited about this series. It came to us from a couple of different directions. Our liturgist Terry had actually mentioned a series like this a few months ago. And then you kind of independently suggested maybe we might do something like this. And we just sort of started getting this kind of idea about, I like the way you're thinking about that. Is sort of the idea of this series is that there is a relationship between God and humankind, God and Israel, God and the people of faith that everybody's committed to, but it is not always easy. And sometimes people disappoint God, and sometimes God disappoints people. And so this issue of like, how do we raise our disappointments and frustrations and work through the relationship? And I think this is just such an interesting set of texts that we have ended up with. I mean, there's a whole lot of texts in the biblical corpus that you could have put in this series, and we have chosen 7 of them. And I'm really glad that we're coming back to this text. I think it's sort of the quintessential dispute with God and Israel text that sort of lays some groundwork. Both this week's text in Exodus 32 and next week's in 33 and 34, they become kind of pivotal going forward. And so I think it's worth going back for sure and lingering over this text. And it changes so much. The difference between the regular narrative lectionary, which ends at verse 14, where God changes God's mind. And then when you continue on through the rest of 32 and 33 and the first part of 34, like it's actually a lot more complicated than God's just like, yeah, you know what, it's fine. There's a lot more going on, that there's some woundedness and some things that need repairing and healing. So I'm excited to talk about this text.
Me too. So our reading for today, it's a lot of verses. Exodus chapter 32, verses 1 through 20, and then 30 through 35. Is there anything that you would want to offer in terms of context? If people, we said most people know the story. Not everybody knows the story. Is there any context you'd want to offer in terms of...
I'm not sure if this story is as well known in my community. I mean, everybody knows the story, but I don't know if the details of this story are known as well in my community as they may be in yours. Now, I think you set a good context for us. The basic idea is the Israelites have been in slavery in Egypt for 400 years, and they have just escaped across the waters of the Red Sea. In chapter 15, they made their way to Sinai, where they received first the 10 Commandments and then the covenant code. And in chapter 24, they said, yes, we accept this covenant and we will do the things. And there was a blood oath, and this is sealed the covenant in chapter 24. And then the intervening chapters are, one of your favorite texts, which I think probably a lot of my people have never read, is the instructions, very elaborate instructions for how one should prepare and maintain a holy space for the proper worship of God. And then instead of doing that, the people do this, which we're going to read. And so it's kind of interesting, right from the jump, people are sort of trying to figure out how to shortcut or I don't know how you want to process that as we go forward about why this urgency to respond in this particular way. But they've been given instructions for how they should pay observance to God.
Yeah. Well, let's jump into the text and see where it might lead us on that front.
Let's do.
All right. So I am picking up in chapter 32, verse 1, and I am reading from the NJPS. When the people saw that Moses was so long in coming down from the mountain, the people gathered against Aaron and said to him, "Come, make us a god who shall go before us, for we do not know what has happened to Moses, the man who brought us from the land of Egypt." Aaron said to them, "Take off the gold rings that are on the ears of your wives, your sons, and your daughters, and bring them to me." And all the people took off the gold rings that were in their ears and brought them to Aaron. Then he took from them and cast in a mold and made it into a molten calf. And they exclaimed, "This is your God, O Israel, who brought you out of the land of Egypt." When Aaron saw this, he built an altar before it, and Aaron announced, "Tomorrow shall be a festival of God." Early next day, the people offered up burnt offerings and brought sacrifices of well-being. They sat down to eat and drink, and then rose to dance. God spoke to Moses, "Hurry down, for your people whom you brought out of the land of Egypt have acted basely. They have been quick to turn aside from the way that I enjoined upon them. They have made themselves a molten calf and bowed low to it and sacrificed to it, saying, 'This is your God, O Israel, who brought you out of the land of Egypt.'" God further said to Moses, "I see that this is a stiff-necked people. Now let me be, that my anger may blaze forth against them, and that I may destroy them and make of you a great nation."
Amy, I'm so interested in your translation, which does not seem to be distinguishing between Adonai and Elohim. Is that right?
Yeah. I don't know why my translation is making that choice, but it is.
Yeah. Is that are you reading the new JPS like you often do? That's so interesting. Okay.
I know. I noticed that too in verse 5. It says like Chag la Adonai, like the four-letter name of God.
Right.
Most often translated as Lord, caps, all caps, Lord. But this translation has God. Also in all caps for some.
So if you're reading it, you can distinguish.
I mean, I guess.
But if you're listening, you can't distinguish. That's interesting. Yeah. I think that the difference in the names there is actually kind of important in this particular
Tell me more about that.
Well, the word Elohim is one of the names for God, which is used in the Genesis 1, the priestly kind of text. And it is also a word which means gods, like just plural. And so the CEB translation is saying, "These are your gods who brought you out of Egypt." You're reading, "This is your God." But it's playing with that word Elohim, which can have that dual meaning. Whereas Adonai, the divine proper name, is much more specific. And the ambiguity is missing there. And so I was wondering in this text if that sort of the use, like contrasting the proper name with this ambiguous, maybe the people have gotten confused about God versus gods, but Adonai is not confused about Adonai. That's kind of what I was thinking.
Well, and I love that you pointed that out, because if you read the text that way, so I'm looking at verses 4 and 5 here in juxtaposition, where the people exclaim, "This is your God," or "These are your gods. This is the Elohim, O Israel, who brought you out of the land of Egypt." And then when Aaron responds, he says, "Tomorrow shall be a festival to Adonai."
That's
right. So
right.
one way of reading this, because it's very easy to read this and be like, has Aaron lost his ever-loving mind? Like, what is he doing?
Yeah.
If you want to give Aaron a generous read, one thing to do is to say that he sees the people are going off the deep end, kind of. And so he is trying to bend the thing that they seem to want toward Adonai.
Yes.
That's the more generous read of Aaron here.
I love that reading. And, I think we have explored this in a previous conversation, but I really think of that as a powerful way of reading this text. And it connects in some really interesting ways for me to contemporary American Christianity, where there are people who are doing a thing, worshiping a thing which is not the true thing. And if you hold your head just right and pretend like you don't notice, you can kind of keep the cart on the path.
Mm-hmm.
And so this idea of like, what harm do we do when religious leaders or religious people kind of do a wink and a nudge to
Mm-hmm.
pretend like, oh no, we're not talking about the gods. We're talking about
Right.
God
They're
and
trying to hedge a little bit. And then you have to wonder, like,
Right.
did the people even hear that point of
Difference.
distinguishment? I don't
Yes.
think that's a word. But like, did they hear that difference? Or are they hearing it like they hear my translation, which is
That's
like
what I
God
think.
and God. And it's only
so
in
Aaron's on-
Aaron's
Aaron agrees
mind.
with us.
Aaron makes himself feel okay.
Yes,
But-
that's it.
Really what's happening is the people are not thinking about Adonai.
Right. And later in this text, God's going to be very clear, and Moses is going to be very clear.
Mhm.
But Aaron hedges in that way that maybe confirms for people that what you're doing is okay when in fact it's not.
Yeah. Bobby, I know this is always my question when we look at this text, but it says the people saw Moses was so long in coming down the mountain. What do you think sets them off? Are you inclined toward like empathy for the people or really not empathy for the people? Like they just were rescued from Egypt. They just got the 10 Commandments. Like what? What are they doing?
I tend to have an empathy. I think I've learned that from you over the years. One of the things I always appreciate about you is you try to be empathetic toward all the
Empathy toward
characters.
the wrong characters. That's me.
I think one way of reading this is they just have had this traumatic experience, and it was God who led them out of Egypt. And I think that they know that it was God who led them out of Egypt, but their tangible experience was that Moses led them out of Egypt.
Yeah.
And so they trust him and they're following him, and now he is gone.
Mm-hmm.
And so now who do we trust? What do we look to? How do we know? And it seems like they don't. Every once in a while, God shows up in various forms in this text, but they don't have that kind of direct access.
Mm-hmm.
And so Moses is kind of their stand-in.
Mm-hmm.
It is the way they access God.
Mm-hmm.
And it's very easy to confuse the person who connects you to God with God
Right.
and give your loyalty in the wrong direction. And I read that as what has happened here.
Yeah.
If Moses were there, I think that they would follow Moses.
Mm-hmm.
But they're in the wilderness, and they've been through this traumatic experience, and they're scared, and they need something. And so there's no Moses, so what are we going to do
Right.
when you got to do this?
Right.
Do you read it similarly, or would you take it somewhere
Yeah,
else?
no, I do read it similarly, and I almost would, I don't know, maybe add an additional layer to it, even if they are not sort of confusing Moses with God or seeing Moses as their only leader. If their experience has been their primary access to God, like their interactions with God have been largely mediated through Moses at this point. So
Yes.
we can be frustrated with them. The rabbis say, how late was Moses? 6 hours. He was 6 hours late after 40 days, and they couldn't
wow.
wait any longer.
Wow. Yeah.
But that also makes me, I don't know, it again draws my attention back to like how eagerly they were anticipating his return. Like if they said 40 days and he's 6 hours late, like they were really paying attention. They were on the edge of their seats. They didn't have calendars. They were counting the days. So yeah, I have some empathy. I have empathy for them. I do.
Yeah. I think that is appropriate.
One of the things that's so interesting to me in this story is, I don't know, that Moses is the sort of middleman here, and Moses' relationship with the people, and especially Moses' relationship to God. And I'm curious when we get to verse 7. So they do all this crazy stuff that the Israelites are going wild. And God says, Moses doesn't know. Moses is up on top of the mountain with God.
Right.
And the first thing God says about it is to tell Moses, hurry down, for your people whom you brought out of Egypt
Yeah. Yeah.
are doing this thing, have acted basely.
Yeah.
Why do you think, I guess you could ask a couple questions in there, but my first question is, what do you think about the fact that God's first response is to send Moses, is to say, you better hurry, you better hurry down?
That's such a good question. I guess I think about it, although I'm thinking of exceptions even as I'm starting to formulate my sentence.
I love it when that happens.
That the way God tends to interact with the created world is through created people.
Yeah.
And so, yes, God set the people free from Egypt, but God did it through the agent Moses. And so now God is angry and so is doing it through Moses. Although it is curious to me that God says, like, leave me alone so I can destroy them.
God, he really, a lot happens in those couple verses.
Yeah.
First, he tells, his first impulse is to send Moses down. And he doesn't say deal with your people, but I guess that's sort of what I'm inferring from it.
Yeah.
He explains to God God explains to Moses what the people have done. And then God says, you know what? I see where this is a stiff-necked people. These people are not going to change. And so get out of my way. Actually, just get out of my way. And I'm going to destroy them. And you and I can start over. That
now leave me alone, as the CEB has it, and let my fury devour them, is so interesting. Why does God need to be left alone in order to be furious? And I have read it in a couple of different ways. One is God doesn't want Moses to have to witness what God is about to do. The other is that God knows that God's mind can be changed by a human who's going to try to protect the people. And so what God is saying is, don't try to talk me out of this, which turns out then to be exactly what Moses does.
That's right.
And but those to me, I'm much more compelled by that second one, that God already knows that because of the relationship that God has, especially with Moses, but also with the people, that nothing God has said is set in stone unless God can just stay focused. And so the human intervention can always disrupt the plan that God has made. I think I just said about 6 different heresies. But I'm curious what you think about that.
It's fine. Bobby, as you were talking, I was thinking about a midrash that you actually taught me, and I can't remember where in the massive Jewish literature it is, but where one of the rabbis asked, does God have prayers? What does God pray? And the answer is that God prays that God's own compassion will outweigh God's anger or something like that.
Yes.
And the reason I was thinking of that is that in this moment, that moment when you feel the anger so strongly, the impulse to act on it is just overwhelming. And so even if, so God it would feel so good to just act on it, to just let it blaze forth. And God doesn't want to be held back from that.
Yeah. I learned that midrash from Rabbi Jonathan Roos, who was the rabbi at Chautauqua Institution a couple of years ago when I was there. It's in the Talmud. I'd have to go back and find the reference, but it's exactly right that God sort of has these two natures.
Yeah.
And God most often prays to be the compassionate God, not the judgmental God.
But in this moment, God is in anger already. And it's different once you feel the anger yourself.
Yes.
Yeah. Is there anything else you want to add on this first section, or should we go on?
That last line, I will make a great nation out of you.
Yeah.
To me, that is so the offer that's on the table is you, Moses, could basically be the new Abraham.
Yes.
And you're not just one of the people who have, one lineage of Abraham, but now everybody is going to be your lineage. So there's a real offer to Moses to be even more substantial than he already is. And so I can imagine a lot of people who would have taken that offer. Let's get rid of all those guys.
Yeah.
I'm God's person.
No, I think both in terms of, the sort of maybe ego angle that I hear in your suggestion, and also in terms of Moses's relationship to the people is not uncomplicated.
That is
Moses
true.
didn't want this job. Moses was, an Israelite who was raised in the home of Pharaoh and was not fully accepted by his Israelite brothers and sisters during the
That's right.
story as it unfolded in Exodus.
He was chased out of Egypt after he killed that Egyptian slave.
Right, after
the
he tried to
Israelites chased him out.
defend an Israelite who was and yet the opportunity to start anew with people that are whatever you want to classify Moses as, they're fully Moses.
Yeah.
That's what's on the table for him. And as we'll see, and is no surprise to anyone, he will reject that option.
I really like that as we're framing this series as about like the complicated relationship between humans and God. Like it is also about the complicated relationship between humans and other humans.
Yeah.
And like to what extent do you try to hold that relationship and where do you just decide to step away from it?
Oh, that just made me think interesting thoughts. But I'm going to go on. Okay, ready?
Hi, I'm Terry Peterson, minister of St. John's Church of Scotland in Gourock, west of Glasgow on the Scottish coast. And I am the liturgy writer for Bible Worm, which means I get to spend a lot of time listening to Bobby and Amy, and that is a great joy. It is fascinating to hear them read and talk through stories I thought I knew pretty well, since I'm starting my third time through the narrative lectionary now. I always come away with more ideas than I can fit into a liturgy or a sermon, and working with them has deepened my own spiritual life as I write liturgy that follows the contours of their conversations. I appreciate that they don't shy away from the difficult parts, and that they always find connections between these ancient texts and our contemporary life. And it's fun for me to work those connections into liturgy that empowers worshiping communities to speak to and about God in new ways. If you join the Bible Worm Patreon at the Liturgy Worm level or higher, you'll have access to those liturgies and prayers that you can use or adapt, as well as early access to the podcast. Or there are other levels with different benefits, including Bible studies, access to the Bible Worm Collaborative discussion group, and more. Visit patreon.com/BibleWormPodcast to help Bobby and Amy continue creating this incredible resource for people of faith around the world. And now back to this week's podcast.
Picking up in verse 11. But Moses implored the Eternal, his God, saying, "Let not your anger, O Eternal One, blaze forth against your people, whom you delivered from the land of Egypt with great power and with a mighty hand. Let not the Egyptians say, it was with evil intent that he delivered them, only to kill them off in the mountains and annihilate them from the face of the earth. Turn from your blazing anger and renounce the plan to punish your people. Remember your servants, Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, how you swore to them by yourself and said to them, I will make your offspring as numerous as the stars of heaven, and I will give to your offspring this whole land of which I spoke, to possess forever." And God renounced the punishment planned for the people. Bobby, I have usually, I think, read this kind of... Okay, let me back up. How would you describe Moses's approach here? So Moses is trying to de-escalate. How does he do it? Like he could sort of like sing songs and get snacks and like, rub
Right.
God's back or, something.
I mean, he's doing a couple of things there. One is, you had pointed out that God says, your people who you brought out of Egypt.
That's right.
And so Moses turns it back and says, why does your fury burn against your people who you brought out of Egypt? And so there's a sense in which God has been trying to distance and to say, those aren't my people, those are your people. I mean, I do this with my it's mostly joking, but with my wife.
Totally.
When my children do something ridiculous, I'm like, do you know what your kid did? And so this is a little bit like that, but I don't think it's joking. And Moses is reminding God of that connection. So they are your people. You already did a lot on behalf of them. Like you have skin in this game. And then the second part I read is sort of an appeal to God's ego. that God has a public reputation to uphold, and God has just won a great victory over Pharaoh and the gods of Egypt. But if now the whole people just die in the wilderness, then all the nations, the Egyptians are going to say, haha, that God had an evil plan to start with. And that's not who God is. And that's not who God wants to be. And so there's a little bit of like, you got to watch your own reputation. Those are the two things that I see going on here. What do you see when you look at this?
No, I mean, I think those things are right on, and I'm seeing them both right now as ways to try to like, God's focus has gotten very like laser, very lasery. Yes. And I see this as trying to broaden, like sort of, okay, there is anger, and what else is in there? Like what else can we remember is in this relationship? How can we create a little breathing room, a bigger horizon, however we might want to think about that? And so, it just has me thinking a lot about anger in human relationships, and how, there is no relationship that feels great all the time. We talk sometimes in the Jewish community about these. There are two prayers that sit on either side of the Shema, this like central prayer of God's oneness. One is Ahava Rabbah, a great love, and the other is Ahavat Olam, an eternal love. And so there's like this sort of like big magnitude love, and then there's like the enduring commitment that actually doesn't mean it feels great in every moment. Yes.
Yeah.
And I feel like Moses is trying to pull towards that. What is the bigger picture?
I love that
here.
Yeah.
Yeah, your relationship to these very people who are doing this terrible thing right now is bigger than this moment.
I love that.
And also, there's this whole continuity with their ancestors. Remember how nice their ancestors were? But I think the reputation piece is also in there.
I really appreciate that appeal to the ancestors. And, in my class, I teach, I'm about to talk about something that you know so much more about than I do. In the prayer, the Avinu Malkeinu at Yom Kippur, there is that whole, like, forgive us, and then if not for our sake, for the sake of the ancestors, and then if not for the sake of the ancestors, then for your own sake. Like that kind of movement. Am I making sense?
Yeah.
This sort of reminds me of that, where there's sort of like, okay, forgive the people, but if you can't forgive the people, like remember the context of the ancestors, and also remember your own, like who you are. That's just sort of rattling around in my brain.
No, I love that you brought that up, Bobby, because the sort of like maybe underground reason that I've become really interested in this text again this year is it is read at Sukkot, the holiday sort of right after the high holidays, and then it is also read after Passover, like these sort of like bookends of the year. And there are portions of it that are pulled into the liturgy of high holiday, like the element of like, wow, something really bad happened in our relationship, and yet here we still are in relationship. There was a way through that. Is still really important and relevant. And if we only ever tell the everything was fine and everyone got along stories, when something inevitably happens that is bad in our relationship with God or with people in our lives, it's important to have these examples of like, that was really bad.
Yeah.
But here we are on the other side.
Moses is so amazing to me right here, because what God has just said in verse 10 is, leave me alone. And so Moses does exactly the opposite of that.
Nope.
And just says, I'm going to make my case. I'm not backing down.
Yes.
I'm going to remind you of this context of love. I'm going to remind you of your reputation. And, that was a brave thing to do.
Yes.
I don't know if Moses thought about it. We don't get any sort of internal monologue,
right.
But there's no hesitation there. And we get that language here. The CEB has, Moses says, change your mind. And then in the verse 14, the Lord changed his mind. That Hebrew word, necham, has lots of meanings. But change one's mind is a reasonable interpretation of that.
Yes.
Which goes back to the, like, why does God say, leave me alone? Was because he's afraid, God's going to change God's mind. And that's exactly what Moses
That's exactly what happens.
does. Yeah.
I love that you brought that up, Bobby. And, I joked at that end of our regular season, but it's true that luckily I'm not allowed to, but luckily I did not name this summer series because for me, it's very much about like this willingness to say no
Yes.
to God has something in mind and you say no. And sometimes the story plays out one way and sometimes it plays another way. But that's really what happens here. God says, leave me alone. And Moses absolutely does not. Moses does exactly what God does not want him to do. And it works. And thank God it worked.
I love that observation. And, I'm just thinking something about like Moses really had to trust that relationship that he has with God.
Yes.
In order to do this. And I mean, there's one is like, he is just like, okay, well, if I get punished for this, so be it. But I think you can read it as Moses trusts that God's relationship with him can take this sort of standing in and saying no. And it'll be okay because God is who God is.
I love that. I love that, especially because I have this particular interest in how do the relationships work here. And it does take faith in the relationship to just blatantly disobey in this moment.
Yes, that's exactly what happens.
What is happening.
Yes.
Bobby, when it says that God changed God's mind or renounced the punishment, however we want to translate verse 14. Okay, so God's initial idea was, I'm going to destroy these people.
Yes.
And so that is not what's going to happen. God is not going to destroy the people. Do you read this as forgiveness or like, is there more to it? Or is it just like before every single one of them was going to die and now that is not what's going to happen?
This is one of the places where the way that we're framing this text in this series reads very differently to me than the way this text is framed in the narrative lectionary, where we end right here. Because when we're going to read on, we're going to see that God is not just saying no harm, no foul. There is some repercussions that are coming, but they are not the total annihilation. And so I think that this, like when you read this whole text, it puts that question in a different kind of light, which is God has backed off, but it's not that God is just saying like, okay, yeah, it was fine.
Right.
But there is like, God is still wounded. Like God's language here is like, they already broke the covenant. Like we just made it. So God is wounded and there has to be some kind of something, it seems like.
Right. This is not the end. This is not the end of the Israelites. This is maybe not the end of the relationship, or maybe that question is actually still open. I don't know. This is not the end of the Israelites. But it does not say there are not consequences. It's not like this never happened and we'll never speak of it again. We speak of it many times a year in the Jewish community.
Yeah.
Like this did happen. Yeah. So it's pulling back from the extreme and importantly, seeing a willingness of God to not just go forth with the anger when the anger feels like acting on anger can feel good in the moment.
Yes.
All right. I'm picking up in verse 15. Thereupon Moses turned and went down from the mountain bearing the 2 tablets of the pact, tablets inscribed on both their surfaces. They were inscribed on the one side and on the other. The tablets were God's work, and the writing was God's writing, incised upon the tablets. When Joshua heard the sound of the people in its boisterousness, he said to Moses, "There is a cry of war in the camp." But he answered, "It is not the sound of the tune of triumph or the sound of the tune of defeat. It is the sound of song that I hear." As soon as Moses came near the camp and saw the calf and the dancing, he became enraged, and he hurled the tablets from his hands and shattered them at the foot of the mountain. He took the calf that they had made and burned it. He ground it to powder and strewed it upon the water, and so made the Israelites drink it. Bobby, one of the reasons that I wanted to return to this text and be able to read a little bit more is that Moses has just gone from like talking God down from this anger. And that was at a time that Moses didn't see what the people were doing. Someone had just told him what they were doing. God told him what they were doing.
Yes.
Moses's anger, when he actually hears the sounds and sees what the people are doing, is pretty profound.
Yes.
I mean, I guess in some ways that it just feels true to life. You can know something is true in the abstract, and then when you see it happening, have a different response to it.
I love the way you're framing that, Amy. So what you're making me think about is, and I think this is true of me as well, is when you are sort of thinking distantly and in the abstract about things you hear with your ears but do not see with your eyes, it is easier to have compassion. But sometimes when you investigate, and also a little bit like, Moses is one of these folks. And so when we imagine our own folks, people like us, whatever that means, we tend to think like, oh, it couldn't be that bad. But then when you actually like examine, then you're recognizing that maybe it really is that bad. It's curious to me what Moses would have done in the previous section of this text that we just read, if he also could see what was happening.
Yes.
Because you're exactly right. He is very angry. He does not have the power that God has to destroy, but he's expressing a very similar.
He's expressing it. Yes, it
emotion.
seems like a similar level of anger.
This text lingers over the fact that Moses is holding the tablets and that he breaks the tablets. What, you could tell the story without that. Do you have thoughts about, why are we so focused on the status of these tablets and that God had written them and that Moses has broken them?
I mean, I think that is exactly the question. Sort of, what do they represent? I guess in my mind, they sort of represent the relationship. Like, he's holding the relationship between the people and God. And it makes sense that Moses would be the one holding it, because in a lot of ways, Moses is holding the relationship between the people and God right now. And so I feel in this moment that he throws them down and they shatter, that there is again this moment of can this relationship actually endure through this? God has agreed not to destroy all the people, but that doesn't mean that they have to have a relationship.
It's interesting just there when you said, can this relationship survive this? I wasn't sure whether you meant the relationship between God and the people or the relationship between Moses and the people. And I think that ambiguity is actually a really interesting one.
Yes. Bobby, this maybe is I don't know if this will take us sort of off the track that we're on, but I was especially interested in that first verse we read, verse 15. It goes out of its way to tell us that the tablets are inscribed on both their surfaces.
Yeah.
They were inscribed on the one side and on the other. I don't know. How does that detail resonate for you?
All the way through this little section, one of the things that I'm thinking about is this idea that, as I understand it, comes out of your tradition, that the Torah itself is sort of like an act of love from God toward the people, and then engaging with the Torah is an act of love for God by the people. Yeah. And so this sort of God really took some time to write this thing out. And it's like a postcard where you write on the one side.
Those middle school notes where you have written every little corner and crevice of the page. Yeah. Oh, I love that.
That's what it feels like to me.
Yeah. Oh, and then I love, as you pointed out already in verse 16, it's very specific here. The tablets were God's work and the writing was God's writing.
Yes.
And here is Moses holding this unfathomably holy gift and the sort of place of encounter for the Israelites and God. And he is so angry that he shatters it. There's a midrash that the tablets are so heavy that Moses couldn't really have carried them by himself. So he's accompanied by angels, and the angels are helping carry the things or something. It just makes sort of a bigger sort of cosmic deal of what happens when he goes down the mountain and sees the shock of what people are doing, and the angels depart and the tablets fall. Like that's a big moment of rupture.
You're making me think about, just a minute ago when they were on top of the mountain, God almost ruptured a holy relationship with Moses.
That's right.
Because God was angry. And now Moses, who has exactly, as you're saying, this sort of cosmically important love note from God to the people, in his moment of anger, shatters an unspeakably holy object.
Mm-hmm.
And just that theme of like our anger often shatters things relationally seems to be prevalent in this text in a way that I'm not sure I had noticed until just now.
At the very beginning of our conversation, before we even started reading text today, I think, Bobby, you said something about how because we trust our relationship, you said it was just like because we trust so strongly in our relationship with God, we trust the relationship. And I think part of what I feel like is the unfolding drama in this text is I don't know yet whether to trust the relationship. And there are all these moments where it's like, is it going to survive this thing? Is it going to survive this thing? Like if God is out, then God is out. And now we're like, well, is Moses out?
Yeah.
This was a big one.
The thing that's so striking to me here is all of that is on the table and the people are
They have
dancing.
no idea.
They have no idea that anything is going on. I saw on Facebook the other day, and so I'm not sure if it is true, but it was attributed to Kierkegaard, who, at least according to this post, told a story about a fire at a theater, and the clown came from behind the stage and said, "There's a fire in the theater," and everybody thought it was a joke, and so they're like, "Ha ha ha," and they're laughing, and then he says it again, and then they're laughing, and then the quote from Kierkegaard was something like, "This is how I think the world will end, not with panic, but with people of wit laughing because they think it's a joke." And that just like, this is making me think of that the stakes are so high right here and they're having a party. Like the world could have ended just now had Moses not intervened for them, their world anyway. Yes. And they're just having a party.
That's making me wonder in particular, Bobby, if you have any, thoughts or insights to add about these verses 17 and 18, where there's this back and forth about what the sound is that they hear before they have the visual. It sounds like a war cry, but it's not a war cry. It's not triumph. It's not defeat. It's the sound of song. That's what my translation has. What does your translation has?
Mine has party songs. So,
party songs.
We're listening to a little T Swift or something, I guess. I don't know. Party songs makes you read it in a certain kind of way. If you just read it as song, it reminds me a little bit of Whoville, and they're like,
it made me think of
early Christmas morning. That's so funny. Yeah.
Yeah.
Amy, why does Moses make them drink golden calf dust?
I mean, I really in my head, it has sort of turned into like, I'm going to wash your mouth out with soap. Like
that's what I was thinking.
I'm going to make you do something. I know, do something that is directly embodied in relationship to this thing you have done. But I haven't thought a lot about what does it actually mean to take into your body the material evidence of your sin.
My response is sort of scatological, which I'm not sure is the most profound way to read it. But when you crush something up and eat it, you're going to poop it out. And so it's a sense of this, like taking this thing that you were worshiping as a god and rendering it as like the base material that it actually is.
That's really interesting to think of it. I started thinking with you and then went in a slightly different direction, but that is sort of like, how do you metabolize what has just happened here? Like, you're going to have to integrate this into your story, but you're also going to have to poop it out. Like,
I like that.
like it is.
You can't just move on. You have to internalize this in some way.
Happened.
And then, yes, I like that a lot.
Okay, we're going to skip over to verse 30. Is there anything that you want to tell us about what happens between 21 and 30?
I think it's better if you just skip it.
We just skip it. Okay, great. Yeah, Moses is mad. That's what we need to know.
Moses is mad. The Levites kill a bunch of people. That's what happens, right?
Moses is super mad. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to pick up in verse 30. The next day, Moses said to the people, "You have been guilty of a great sin, yet I will now go up to God. Perhaps I may win forgiveness for your sin." Moses went back to God and said, "Alas, this people is guilty of a great sin in making for themselves a god of gold. Now, if you will forgive their sin, well and good. But if not, erase me from the record that you have written." But God said to Moses, "Only someone who has sinned against me will I erase from my record. Go now, lead the people where I told you. See, my angel shall go before you. But when I make an accounting, I will bring them to account for their sins." Then God sent a plague upon the people for what they did with the calf that Aaron made. Oh, there's so much in this section, Bobby.
Mm-hmm.
I think one of the first things that I would love to sort of get your thinking about is there are these different words in here for forgiveness or something related to forgiveness. And it's making me, think back also to the thing we read before about God changed God's mind and didn't do the ra'ah, the, bad thing, but it didn't use the word forgiveness.
Right.
In verse 30, it uses this root, the same root in the word like Yom Kippur, that kippur, that root that I've seen it as like I will wipe away their sin or cover over their sin or something. And then the next one is in verse 32, im tis'ah, which is like, if you will, literally it's something like lift up, like bear their sin, like be willing to like hold their sin.
Yeah.
Which feels different than like wiping away or covering up. What do you think about that, Bobby?
I love that question so much, Amy. And, the way that the CEB has that first verb, I'm not sure how I feel about this in terms of Hebrew, but I like it in terms of English. Moses says in verse 30, "Maybe I can arrange reconciliation on account of your sin." Mm-hmm. And so, like, there's just that sense of repair and acknowledging that there is a breach. Maybe it is yet still possible to reconcile. And then that second verb that you're pointing out, like that is what Moses actually says to God.
Yeah.
Please lift up their sin. And I like that just metaphorically as the way that this thing is going to get reconciled is God is just going to bear it for them. Maybe there is no way to really make it right exactly. But to the people, it's like, let's try to make it right. And so they feel like maybe there's a thing we can do. And then maybe there's actually not a thing that is sufficient unto the task, but you're just asking God here to carry it and say it.
Bobby, what is your translation of 32?
"Please forgive their sin, and if not, then wipe me out of your scroll that you've written."
It's an interesting Hebrew verse. It looks like, so my translation also sort of has like, "If you will forgive their sin, well and good, but if not, erase me from the record." In the Hebrew, there is no well and good. Like it says, im tisa hatatam, like if you will bear, lift up, forgive their sin. Ve'im ayin, like, or if not, like you could also read it as, there are some rabbinic texts that read this as, whether you forgive their sin or not, wipe me out. Like I can't.
Oh, interesting.
I can't bear the thought of you holding this sin they have committed, but I also can't bear the thought of this relationship you have with them not enduring. Like I can't be in, it's just too hard.
I mean, this is the first time I've really thought about it that way. I can't bear the thought of you not forgiving them, and I can't bear the thought of you carrying their sin.
Yes.
There's just no way forward from here
Yes.
that I can bear.
Yes.
Wow. I have read that sort of the other way as Moses saying, if the people can't live, I don't want to live either. And so so that part I really like, I resonate with that as like, he's so committed to their survival or their thriving that if they can't, then he doesn't want to either. But that other piece that you're putting in there about, even if I have to know what you did, God, in order to make that possible, I can't bear that either. That's profound.
It's not you. Certainly, the typical translations are what you said, is that Moses, for whatever reason, feels so tied into the Israelites, even though he could have gotten out of this whole situation. He attaches himself to them. He is the one with this close relationship to God. He knows that God relies on him and seems to really trust him.
Yes.
And so he's willing to put himself on the line. But I do also like the possibility that Moses is just like, these people are my people and you are my God. And I am the person trying to hold this relationship between you. And like, just like the shattering tablets, like I don't know how to hold this breach that has just happened.
That's beautiful.
And then just like God told Moses before, don't talk me out of this, I'm going to do it. Moses says, erase me from the record. And God says, no. Nice try. You're not if I'm not getting out of this, you're not getting out of this.
Yeah.
I don't know. Where do you think things sort of stand when we read verses 34 and 35? Lead the people where I told you, my angel shall go before you. And there are going to be consequences for this.
Yeah.
So if we're looking at sort of the overall relationship, this story doesn't end here. We're going to read some more next week. But where do you think the relationship is at this point?
I mean, this reads really hard to me, where, there are moments in one's life where you are very much committed to the relationships that you are in, but those relationships are wounded and difficult. And so you stay in them because you are committed to staying in them. And this sort of reads that way to me, like God's like, I don't really want to be there, so I'm sending my messenger.
Yeah.
And Moses is like, I don't really want to be there, but God's telling me to lead. The people maybe don't even quite understand what they have done, but so they're following along, and there's going to be a time when we're going to have to sort this out, but that time is not right now. We're just gonna move ahead for now and deal with the consequences later. It's kind of where I'm reading it. How do you read that part?
I'm really glad that you pointed out that God says, my angel will go, my messenger will go before you. And I think it's easy to read that as like, that's a good thing. Who doesn't want God's angel? Yeah, that's good.
Right.
And it is good. And it's not God's presence. God is sending someone else.
Right.
And so I think just as you're saying, there's a commitment to staying in the relationship, and there's just a lot of pain in that place right now, and maybe not knowing how this is gonna how they're gonna do this, how this is gonna look. Like they sort of have figured out like the next, okay, y'all keep walking. I'm not taking you out of this, Moses. It's too bad. And I'll send a messenger.
Yeah.
But everything's not okay.
You sort of get the image of them kind of trudging through the wilderness together. They're still together.
They're still together. That's right. And I think...
But it's a trudge.
I imagine everyone has had points in relationships that are important to them where this is what it feels like. Something really bad has happened. And you can't, like, forgiveness is not magic. Even if God forgives, it doesn't necessarily mean everything's back to how it was before. It's not an undo button. So it feels like they're in that kind of middle space. But for the commitment of Moses and God to their relationship with each other, and also Moses' commitment to his relationship with the people, it would not, like, it seems like it took everything that both of those characters in this story had to hold on to the relationship
Yes.
just to be able to get to a quieter place.
Man, this story reads different when you don't stop at verse
When
14.
you don't stop at 14. And
Yeah.
we're not really stopping here. We're stopping here for today, but we'll
Right.
continue
Pick up
some
again
more
next week.
next time. And so at this sort of pausing moment, I wonder what feels important, salient to you here.
The way this text is striking me right now is very deeply connected to my own Christian community and this historical moment in which we find ourselves. And it goes all the way back to that early part of this text where the people ask, because of their anxiety and their fearfulness, they ask Aaron to make an Elohim to guide them. And Aaron responds by saying, "Here is your Adonai." And that sort of crossing the breach between what is basically apostasy and making it sort of seem like maybe it's okay,
It's fine.
like
It's
it's
fine.
actually an orthodox position or something. And then this leads to this rupture, all I can really think about right now is the Christian nationalism that has overtaken American Christianity in many circles right now, and the sort of long path of Christians who don't hold that view, but who have sort of, not rejected that idea just out of hand and sort of said like, okay, like we can sort of go there, or adopting some of that language that connects our Christian faith to our patriotic beliefs, like allowing that to be what there is. And it's an apostasy, but it's one that we have allowed to stand, and it ruptures all of the relationships all the way down. It is not true worship of God. And I imagine that God wants to distance from it, maybe to destroy us. And here we are. And, it's not that we can never get back from there, but it is also not the case that there is a hand wave. We don't just end at verse 14 where somebody says, God, just remember you love those guys and it's all fine. Like, it's going to be fine, but there is, a facing of what we have done and or what we have allowed to happen. There's an eating of the idol and ingesting it into ourselves. And there is trudging through the wilderness while God bears what we have done and tries to figure out how to go forward together. And I really think like that's a moment that I think that we are in. And I'm saying we very purposefully here because I don't want to say like those other Christians over there, because in this text, everybody's tied up in it together. Moses is tied up in it together. Even if he doesn't want to be, God says, no, you're part of this community. And so I just think that this text speaks to a moment that we are in, and the repair, the reparation, the acknowledgement of where we have gotten to that is before us. And it doesn't end it ends in a positive place. Like we were just saying, like they are still together.
Yeah.
And also nobody really wants to be there. And it is a trudge, and there are consequences yet still to come, but they're still together. That's kind of what I take from this today.
Yeah, that's really real. It's a little too real, Bobby. But I think, sometimes when we have talked about interfaith dialogue, you have asked the question of like, how far can we go together before we have to part? And I feel like this is sort of a flip side of that, the other edge of the sword, which is like, when are we going down a slippery slope and actually misleading, or adding some kind of flourish on things that make it feel okay intellectually to us, but actually that's not what's happening. And I think that's a real issue of discernment. Like you have to really check in with yourself and your God about which one are you doing.
Yes.
Yeah.
What about you, Amy? What are you seeing in this text today?
I mean, I love a good heartbreaking text. Okay, here's what I love about this text, even just up to this point. The worst possible thing has happened. They have done the worst possible thing, the Israelites. I mean, I don't know, maybe there are other worse things you could put in the same category, but this was really bad.
Yes.
And both Moses and God, in turn with each other, they used every bit of sort of energy and positivity and hope they could muster to talk each other down and to sort of like claw their way to some kind, like they're trying to climb back up a mountain. They don't get to the top of the mountain. Everything is not okay, but they get to some kind of more stable place so everything doesn't fall completely off a cliff. This just feels so true to life to me. Like bad things happen in relationships. And if our expectation is that when something bad happens, we've fallen off a cliff and that's it, it just closes off. It just closes off a lot. And so I think for me, having a model in scripture of what do we do? What can happen next? What's possible is really critically important. And I think your point that like they have not arrived at some kind of triumph at the end of this story. Everything is not okay, but I feel like what they've done is kind of bought themselves some time so that healing is possible and so that other aspects of relationship can come into the story and they don't, so that this sin is not the only biggest part of the story. And sometimes that is what we can pray for. It's just like a little more time and space. And is there spaciousness to let something else in around the pain of whatever has happened? And it is a difficult place to be in, but it is true. That is a true story. So I like seeing it here.
That's lovely, Amy. I'm glad we debated whether to include this text in our series or not.
Yeah.
And I'm glad that we did because I'm seeing a whole new side of this text now after talking about it with you.
And we shall continue. Next time we'll be in the next chapter, chapter 33. We'll read some from 33, some from 34, and see if we get to a little more resolution.
That'll be good.
All right, my friend. Really good to see Summer Bobby here.
Yes. See you next time.
See you next time. Bye.
Bye.
Thanks for joining us for this week's episode of Bible Worm. If you've enjoyed this free podcast, we hope you'll help us to keep it going by joining our Patreon for as little as $4 per month. You can also sign up for other goodies like early access, video lectures, weekly liturgies, and more. Visit patreon.com/BibleWormPodcast for details.
Bible Worm is produced and edited by Bobby Williamson. Our theme song is sung by Colin Bagby, and our theme music is The World at Large by Dano Songs. Many thanks to all our Patreon supporters for helping us make this podcast possible.
This story still has more to say. This was a bit of a cliffhanger. So next time, we'll pick up for one more week in this story, reading Exodus chapter 33, verses 1 through 21, and 34, verses 1 through 9. Until then, keep on digging.